Hey everyone, today I am going to be reacting to insane secrets that ruin people's life. Storytime animated live.
The crowd behind me was cheering loudly as we watched our school's football team score again, putting us in the lead. I was busy cheering and chanting encouragement with my fellow cheerleaders when I felt someone touch my elbow. I turned around and saw Derek, one of the most popular guys at school.
Do
He
you
wasn't
like
a
him?
football player, he was just rich and brilliant. We
Oh.
chatted for a while until he asked me out on a date. I said yes because he was very cute and charming. I laughed when I saw him go back to his friends and get teased. Please take just a second to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to let us know you want more of these insane stories. The next day, I went on that date with Derek. I got all dressed up and looked like a doll when he picked me up. He was a perfect gentleman, opening the door of his car for me and opening the door of the little cafe he took me to. Sadly, the conversation wasn't that good. I found myself dozing off listening to him blabber on and on about himself for what felt like hours. He was incredibly dull. He had the personality of the color beige. He finally asked me about myself, and I was talking to him about my favorite horror movies when he had the nerve to
I
say,
hate horror
"Wow, you're
movies.
not like other girls, are you?" For a second, I couldn't believe he had really just said that. "And what's wrong with other girls?" I asked him. "I'm very much like other girls, and I love it." He then went on to say how he didn't mean it as a bad thing, but my mind was pretty much made up. There wasn't gonna be a second date. He was selfish, vain, and at the same time, awfully dull. Sometime later, I was in cheer practice. We were doing a human pyramid, and I was around the middle. The girl next to me was always rude. She judged the way I did my makeup and said stuff about me behind my back. The girl who went to the top was climbing, when the girl next to me nudged my arm, making my elbow buckle and the entire pyramid collapse. When we were all on the floor in pain, she had the nerve to go, "Ophelia, what the hell? It was so your fault. Seriously, what is it with these people?" I immediately stood up and pointed at her as I went on a rant about everything she was always doing to me and how I always let it slide. The girls all sat wide-eyed, some visibly enjoying the drama as I called that girl out. Then she stood up too, took her hoop earrings off, which she shouldn't have been wearing during practice anyways, and strutted up to me, only to push me like a 6-year-old on a playground. I, of course, pushed her back, and soon enough we were fighting on the floor. When the coach and principal separated us, we were both tugging on each other's hair, but then her extensions completely came off. She pretended it hurt, but I said, "Oh, please, these are barely taped to your hair. Everyone could tell you put them on wrong." Since I was the only one who did damage, though minimal, I was the only one punished. I had to stay behind after school and mop the floors of a few classrooms and the main hallway for 2 weeks. One of the cleaning ladies handed me a bucket and a mop as soon as school ended, and when classrooms were empty, I started working. I honestly didn't mind mopping. The only thing I was mad about was the other girl not being punished. I put my earbuds in and danced around while mopping the classrooms. The cleaning lady from before then came into the classroom that I had just finished cleaning, looked around, and told me to move on to the hall. I never noticed how nasty the floors were after school. I mopped and mopped, but they still didn't look clean. I didn't notice my shoelaces were untied, but I tripped over them and crashed into a locker, the mop bumping right on the lock. The locker burst open, and an old-looking notebook fell out, falling open on my freshly mopped floor. I picked it up and read the pages that were open. It was full of rumors and secrets of people in my school. Almost everyone had secrets written in that notebook, even me. How did the owner know about the time I choked on a fly while cheering? Suddenly, it clicked. You see, my school was mostly normal, but we had a leak, I guess. A couple times a week at completely random times, somebody hacked into my school's loudspeakers and in a disguised voice began telling people secrets or making up rumors about them. The amount of students who left or got expelled and teachers who got fired was unbelievable. One time, a math teacher broke down in class when the loudspeaker exposed that she was pregnant with the married principal's baby. Let's just say we have a new principal and math teacher now. The notebook was insane, though. I figured it belonged to whoever hacked into the loudspeaker. I shoved it back into the locker and wrote down the number of the locker in my phone, so I wouldn't forget which one it was. I had a plan to end this. Every day after that, I nonchalantly walked past the locker or watched it from afar, waiting to see who it belonged to. Every time I thought someone was about to open it, they simply kept walking. I had almost given up when it finally happened. I was walking out of class when Derek, the guy I went on a terrible date with, threw his arm over my shoulders and walked with me, asking me for a second chance to impress me. I wasn't amused, maybe even a little uncomfortable, but we kept walking. He said he'd walk me to class first, but he needed to go to his locker for a second. I shrugged and kept walking, but then we got closer to the locker, and my heartbeat quickened. He then proceeded to actually open the locker, and I saw him take out the notebook and put it in the back of his locker. I stood wide-eyed, not believing he was the one low-key ruining people's lives. "What?" he asked me when he noticed I was staring. I dismissed it, saying I zoned out. That day after school, I hurried up mopping the classrooms so I could go to the hallway. I mopped the dirtiest parts first so anyone walking past saw that I did do something, and then went to the locker. I jiggled it to see if it opened, but it didn't. I then started hitting the lock with my mop, and after a few tries, it popped open. The notebook was at the back, closed. This time, I opened it at the first page. It was full of names and years in various handwriting. They must have been the owners of it. I started flipping through it, and it became obvious. The notebook belonged to a senior at this school, and when they graduated, they passed it down to someone else. I also saw that the previous owners were much worse than Derek. One of them wrote in detail how they dumped a bunch of bugs into the cafeteria food and got people sick. And another wrote about how they drove a student's car into a lake. Some of them did pretty bad stuff. What freaked me out about the notebook was that some pages said things like, "If you get it, burn this book," or "It takes over you." They wrote stuff saying how the book had some sort of magic. I shut the book and stuffed it in my bag before continuing to mop. On my bike ride home, I kept thinking about the book and Derek. He had done some pretty bad stuff, gotten teachers fired and humiliated students. But he wasn't the worst of them. And honestly, he did a lot of good for the school. He often picked up garbage or volunteered at events. He tutored kids and often sat with old people at the nursing home to entertain them a little. I was conflicted. Part of me wanted him to be punished for what he'd done to people, but part of me wasn't sure he deserved a punishment. The next day I went to school, still with the notebook in my bag. I saw Derek in class. He looked different. His eyes had bags under them, and his hair was messy. He was twitching slightly, and if he spoke, he did so very loudly. He was scary. I saw him digging through his locker and bag many times, trying to find the notebook. Later, I was walking down the hall when I felt someone grab my elbow roughly and whisper in my ear, "You forgot about the security cameras, you little thief." Derek then grabbed my bag and tore it open, but I managed to snatch the book out of his hands and threw it to someone else. A game of hot potato began. Some people caught a glimpse of a page before passing it to someone else, and they looked horrified. Others took out their phones to record Derek losing his mind trying to grab the notebook, while others took pictures of the pages. Derek yelled at them to stop and to give it back. He looked like a caveman at that point. He finally grabbed hold of it, but everyone was already looking at him like he was a monster. They already had pictures and videos, so keeping the notebook private was useless. Out of nowhere, he started running, pushing people out of the way and clutching the notebook to his chest. He ran out of the school and straight into the woods. Some ran after him, but he was incredibly fast. It was as if he was possessed by something. The police were called and his parents were informed. They arranged a search party, so we all left school and went to look for him. My heart was beating incredibly fast. My blood sugar was low, so I snacked on a cereal bar as I walked through the woods with the cheer squad. I could hear people whispering about me. They thought it was my fault. They thought I had broken the school's golden boy. Then we spotted some paper in a bush. On it, someone had written "burn it" in red ink. "Ew, is that blood?" The girl I got into a fight with squealed, but someone said, "Shut up, Heather." And she did indeed shut up. I saw some more paper ahead of us. I walked a bit faster than the others, following the trail. I started seeing more and more pieces of paper, all with similar stuff written on them. Then I saw Derek. We were standing on opposite sides of the creek. He was panting and barefoot. His clothes were torn and he had scratches on his face and arms, as if he had run through sharp bushes. He was clutching the notebook in one hand so tightly that his knuckles were white. We stared at each other for a few minutes. I couldn't get a single word out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a lighter. He held the lit lighter under the notebook, and it began burning. We heard my cheer squad approaching in the distance, shouting my name. He twitched like a deer when they hear a sound in the quiet, and he dropped the book on the dry leaves. He then ran faster than ever away from me and the notebook. Something pushed me to run across the creek, not caring about slipping or getting wet, and I started stomping on the flames to extinguish them. I grabbed the partially burnt notebook, and a force seemed to draw me in. I heard voices coming from it. There was something sinister about it. I snapped out of its trance and chucked it far away into the creek to be carried away by the water. My cheer squad then ran towards me, glad to see I was okay. They saw I was upset, so we all walked back to the school. Groups of people in our town took turns searching the woods for Derek, but he was gone. Not a single trace was found. He disappeared into thin air.
My sister Lorraine and I are 1 year apart, but we grew up like twins. She was my best friend, my confidant, and my cheerleader. Our parents divorced 10 years ago. At home, we shared a room and we did almost everything together. While most of my friends were totally annoyed by their younger siblings, I wasn't. She was a total joy. When it was time for me to go to college, we cried and cried. How would we live apart from each other? Before I continue, please like and subscribe to this channel if you never want to live apart from other people you love most. I attended one of the best colleges in the country, and I was a straight A student. College life was thrilling. The books and lectures were my favorite parts, though. I wasn't into all the drinking and partying. I'd go to coffee shops and book club meetings instead. I'd usually rush back to my dorm to FaceTime Lorraine. She still had 1 more year of high school before she could finally join me. We couldn't wait. One night she called me and she sounded very confused. Lisa, haven't you ever found it strange that Mom and Dad don't seem to hate each other, yet they've been divorced all this time? She asked. What made you think about this all of a sudden? I replied. Well, I remember us all being a big, happy family, and then suddenly it all came to an end and they separated with no warning. Just like that. Haven't you ever found it strange that there were no signs or anything? They broke up so suddenly, she said, and went quiet for a while. Do you think we could get them to fall in love again? She continued. No, Lorraine, I think it's a very bad idea. Please think about something else. We're happy with Dad and we see Mom often enough. I don't think they should get back together, I replied. But they've never even dated anyone after they broke up. Dad never had a girlfriend, Mom never had a boyfriend. How come they're divorced, but they still refuse to move on, she whined. I don't know, but I don't think we should interfere, I replied. The truth was, I had been hiding a deep, dark secret from her since we were children. It was the only thing I ever kept from her, and I knew that if she meddled in our parents' relationship now, that it would result in a complete disaster. I tried to change the topic to make her think about something else. The Christmas vacation was coming soon, so we began thinking of all the cool stuff we'd do when I came back home. When I finally returned for the holidays, my dad picked me up from the airport. My mom and sister were waiting for me at home. They threw me a small welcome back celebration, and everyone was so cheerful. My mom and dad even danced together. It was really hard to tell that my parents were a divorced couple. It was all a bit weird, but I was happy. My sister and I enjoyed ourselves to the fullest. We hung out at the malls, did our nails, visited museums, and drank lots of pumpkin spice lattes. We even let our friends set us up on double-blind dates, just for the fun of it. After we'd eaten, we'd pretend to go to the bathroom and just disappear, leaving the guys in despair, waiting for us to come back. On Christmas Eve, my parents decided to take us out to dinner in a fancy Italian restaurant. This was actually a family tradition. We'd go out, eat until we had no more space in our stomachs, and then return home to open presents. We'd always do this together, regardless of the fact that our parents were divorced. Lorraine and I wore matching dresses. Our mom and dad also looked fabulous. When we arrived at the restaurant, we were taken to our seat, and my dad got started on his Christmas Eve dad jokes. He really thought he was funny. But then again, all dads do. Hey ladies, listen to this cool joke I found on the internet. What's an astronaut's favorite part of the computer? He said. I don't know, Dad. Please enlighten us, Lorraine replied while rolling her eyes. The space bar, he chuckled. I nearly fell off my chair because I thought that one was really funny. So,
Okay,
what
now
shall we
that's
eat
not
tonight?
funny.
I'd tell you another joke about pizza, but it would be too cheesy. Hey, Lisa, you're
that
old enough
was
to
a
drink
good
alcohol
one.
now, aren't you? Do you want some champagne? My father joked. Sure, but Lorraine can't have any, I laughed. So, tell us more about life at college, my mom interrupted. Well, it's a pretty amazing experience. I'm meeting lots of interesting people and learning many things. The only sad part is that Lorraine isn't there, I replied. Well, if she studies hard enough, she'll be able to join you soon, she said. Everyone was in such a jolly mood that night. So I suppose this is why Lorraine decided that it was the best time to ruin it all. Mom? Dad? Why did you get a divorce? She asked suddenly. Immediately, I had a flashback to 10 years ago. I was upstairs playing with my dollhouse when Lorraine was at a piano lesson. I heard a noise outside, so I looked through my window and saw the mailman leaving. I loved getting mail. Collecting and organizing the letters at home was my favorite chore. I quickly ran to the mailbox and collected the letters. When I got inside, I sorted through them. Most of them were bills and spam, but one caught my eye straight away. It was a black envelope with no address and no name. As I was naturally inquisitive, I opened it and read, Dear Mrs. Miller, this letter concerns Experiment 882B, also known as Lorraine Miller. We would as soon as possible, as we would like to conduct some more tests on the subject. Please remember that you have signed a legally binding contract, and that violation of this contract will result in numerous negative repercussions. I was confused because some of these words were too big for me to understand at that age. I just knew that it concerned my sister, an experiment, and a laboratory. As I sat there in confusion, my mother walked through the door. What's wrong, sweetie? She said. I just read a strange letter about you and Lorraine. Can you explain it to me? I asked. She glanced at the envelopes, and when she spotted the black one, she gasped. That is odd. They don't normally send letters through regular mail. Let me see that, she said. Who? Who are you talking about, Mom? I was even more confused. I guess I'll have to tell you everything, she sighed. Lorraine is your half-sister. What I mean is that you don't have the same father, she continued. I gasped. What? Yes, but that's only a little part of the problem. When you were born, your dad and I weren't in a good place. What I mean is that we didn't have much money. Some days we had nothing to eat. It was hard for him to find a job, and he had just left college. And well, I dropped out of high school. We just had you, and we wanted to give you the best life possible, but it was almost impossible. One day, as I sat crying in the train station with you wrapped in an old blanket, I was approached by a scientist. He asked me if I would be interested in carrying an experimental baby. I would be paid millions for this experiment, but I'd have to do as they said, even if it meant conducting tests on the baby after she was born, she explained. Is Lorraine an experiment? I would be paid millions for this experiment, but I'd have to do as they said, even if it meant conducting tests on the baby after she was born, she explained. Is Lorraine an experiment? I asked, shocked. Yes. I went to the laboratory that same day. I received $500,000 as a down payment. I became pregnant later and had the baby. Every few months, I'd continue to receive checks in the mail. Your father was often curious where we got all the money, but I'd just tell him I was promoted or that I won some of it. He was never a man to ask too many questions, she said. You can't be serious, shouted my dad. He had been standing behind us that whole time and heard everything. Lorraine isn't my daughter. She's 8 years old. How could you have kept such a secret from me for 8 whole years? He said angrily. Honey, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for you to hear that. This experiment pays the bills and helps us to live comfortably. I think that you should thank me. It's not like I cheated on you or anything. Can't we just forget that you heard about this? I don't want Lorraine to know either. My mom pleaded. No, I'm leaving you. I'm filing for a divorce as soon as I can. There is no way I can be with a person who has been so dishonest with me. You're supposed to be my wife, my best friend, my dad said, wiping the tears from his face as he left the room. As a 9-year-old, this entire revelation was devastating. My mom asked me to keep this all a secret. She said she'd deposit a few $1,000s into my account every day from then, and this would ensure that I'd be comfortable for the rest of my life. All she wanted in return was for me to never tell Lorraine the truth. Although I was young, I was mature enough to understand money. I also believed that my sister would be heartbroken if she knew the truth. So I kept this all to myself. However, all the truth was about to be revealed at our Christmas Eve dinner. Apparently, my dad couldn't hold in the secret any longer. The whole mood of the table turned into a serious one. "Lorraine, I'm not your real father. Your mother kept this secret from me for 8 years. This is why I chose to divorce her. She is dishonest," he said. "What do you mean? Did Mom cheat?" she asked while looking extremely baffled. My mom then told her the truth from the beginning to end. There weren't enough napkins to wipe away all of Lorraine's tears. "But wait, there's more," my mom said. "What?" we all said at the same time. "When Lorraine turns 18, I have to turn her into the lab. Even if she tries to run away, they will find her. I've tried to avoid them before, but I realized that they are some very dangerous people.
No.
According to the contract I signed, Lorraine isn't mine. She doesn't even belong to herself. I suppose you could say she belongs to science," she said emotionlessly, almost as if she didn't care. "Why did you keep this part from me?" I asked. "Wait, you knew about all of this? And Dad too?" said Lorraine. "I kept it all a secret to protect you," I said. "Aren't you going to tell her that I also paid you tons of money to be quiet?" my mom added angrily. "You were paid to lie to me?" screamed Lorraine. Suddenly, she got off her chair and ran outside. I ran after her, filled with guilt, shame, and remorse. I grabbed onto her arm just before she ran into the traffic. "Lorraine, please stop. I'm sorry," I pleaded. "Please just let me go," she replied. "Listen to me. I'm
They look
so
like
sorry.
twins.
I am sorry for everything. You mean more to me than anyone else in the world. I promise you that we will get through this together, you and I. We can run away together, and they'll never find us. I have enough money in the bank because of Mom. It's more than enough to take care of us. Please let me make it up to you," I said. I managed to persuade Lorraine to stay with me. We went on the run that very night without saying anything to our parents. I had to drop out of college and change every plan that I had for my life. Every few weeks, we'd have to change names, countries, and appearances. This is certainly not the life I imagined for myself, but I have to make it up to my sister.
I moved out of my house in a hurry as soon as I turned 18. It was mostly because my family was very disturbing, as my father was out drinking all the time, and my stepmom was complaining all the time. It was a very toxic environment, so there was nothing for me there, and no one cared about me, so I just left. And since everything happened so quickly, I didn't think of or plan for my financial security. I did have a job at a local diner, but I wasn't able to save at all from that because I had to buy food for the family, and since I was moving away from that town, I couldn't have that job anymore. So I crashed at an old friend's apartment, all broke and without any source of income. But before we move on, like this video, hit that subscribe button, and activate the notification bell for more juicy content like this. And the problem was that I wasn't very good at anything in particular, except for court tennis. I used to play that when I was in school and was almost a champion, but I stopped playing because of the family. Also, that skill was not going to get me any money unless I played professionally, which was not possible. One day, I was going through the newspaper to see if there was any vacancy advertisement, and the friend whose place I was living at suggested that I shouldn't waste my time on it and find a job I could do well. "Why don't you provide private tennis lessons to a bunch of stay-at-home housewives in the rich neighborhood nearby?" he suggested, and honestly, that was one of the best ideas he ever had. I felt a little embarrassed to not have thought of it first. "That's a great idea," I said, and then we started planning for it. First off, we printed out some posters and flyers with my contact number and set them up in coffee shops and grocery stores around the area that gave out flyers to some of the women asking if anyone was seeking a personal tennis trainer. After that, it was a waiting game. I waited for someone to call me about the poster, but no one did. So I waited for a few days more, and still, there was none. I was getting more and more disappointed and sad with each passing day. But then, suddenly, after a few days, I got a call from a woman to inquire about the training and the booking. And then I got another call in the next few hours, and another. In the next 2 days, I was booked by 5 rich housewives to train them for court tennis. After we finished discussing the price, I gave them each an appointment, making morning and evening shifts for 5 days, which meant I was supposed to train each woman 2 days a week. I was so happy and overwhelmed that I was finally going to earn some money of my own and get my own apartment soon. So I went to the first house owned by Mrs. Fletcher for the first day as a personal trainer. Her house was huge and so luxurious. There was no doubt that they were loaded. Her water bottle must have been more expensive than my whole outfit. I'm talking about that rich. So I finished up my appointment there after 1.5 hours of training with Mrs. Fletcher. And then again in the evening, I went to Mrs. O'Neill's house. And their house was even bigger than the first one. And she even tipped me for the evening session. And that was not even in the deal. Keep it. We have a lot of it, she said when I told her it wasn't necessary. I knew she was showing off, but I kept thinking it must be the way of the rich. After that, I went to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th houses according to the set time, and all the houses were just as rich as the houses I had been to for the training. I don't know what impact seeing all that wealth made on me, but I started having a great desire to acquire that wealth, almost like greed took over me. Yes, I was greedy and thought that it was so unfair that they had all that money and all those luxuries I had never expected to even witness, and I had to work so hard to earn even a little bit of it. So I started plotting ways to trick those women to give me the money. I knew that those women wouldn't take long to fall for an emotional act, so I decided to go with it. For the next week during the training with Mrs. Fletcher, I suddenly pretended to faint in the middle of the game. Mrs. Fletcher came running towards me and tried to wake me up, but I didn't for a couple of minutes. I could tell that she was actually worried as I could hear it in her voice. Then she sprinkled some water on my face, and I finally decided to wake up from my fake unconsciousness. After that, she asked me what was wrong and if I was feeling okay. So I pulled up an emotional story to tell her. I'm having some problems with money, so I've not been eating well. Maybe I got weak because of that, I said. Oh, poor you, she said, and thought for a while, and continued speaking. I know we had a deal to pay you by the end of the week, but let me help you with some for now, she said. So I acted if I was a little uncomfortable, but that was exactly what I had wanted. I insist, she said, and handed me $250 just because she felt bad for me, which was almost equal to my pay for a week. I was so happy, but I kept it, thanked her, and left. After that, I did the same act with the other 4 women. All of them gave me extra cash. You wouldn't believe it, but Mrs. O'Neill gave me $500, which was almost double my pay. My plan was a huge success, and it worked perfectly. And I had more money than my friend whose place I was in, and I could tell that he was a little jealous. However, I still felt like the money was not enough, and I wanted to get more, way more than that from them. So I thought since I knew that they were very easy to manipulate emotionally and would do anything for me, if I presented a sob story, I could aim for much more money than $500. For that, I waited a few weeks after my first act because I didn't want them to find my story suspicious. After that, I went with the same pattern. On the first training session of the week, which was with Mrs. Fletcher, I suddenly burst out crying in the middle of the training and sat down on the court. So she came to me and asked me what was wrong. At first, I just told her that I didn't want to burden her with my stressful personal life, which made her want to talk about it more. So I told her that my little sister was in the hospital. My mom called me this morning to inform me that she was seriously ill. She's just a teen and has no health insurance, and we have no other way to save her life.
What a lie.
Even the hospital is requesting to take her somewhere else because we're poor, I said, and started crying even more. Oh, you poor thing, she said after hearing what I said, but I wasn't done. I cannot save her life because I have no money. I failed as a big brother, I added to make it more emotional and a little dramatic. She just looked at me with pity and sympathy. Meanwhile, I was pretty sure that my act would have won me an Oscar if that was a movie. So after a while, I stopped crying and calmed down. Then Mrs. Fletcher got up and asked me to go inside with her. At that moment, I got a little scared, thinking maybe she caught on to my lie and was calling the police or something. But she didn't. Instead, she took me to the room where her safe was and asked me how much money I needed. I told her I remembered my mother mentioning tens of thousands. Okay, I'll give you $50,000. Use what you need and return the rest. and we'll find some other way for you to repay, she said, and handed me the $50,000 in cash. And that was only the beginning, because I played the same card with the other women, and they also fell for my sob story and provided me $50,000 each in cash to save the life of my ill sister, who didn't even exist. After collecting the money from all of them and promising them that I would repay in some way, I had $250,000 in total. So after collecting the last of the money, I ran away from that place to a city far away from there the same night. I realized that what started as a simple con had now turned into a crime, as I had not taken just a few dollars, but thousands of dollars by tricking the women. It could send me to jail, I thought, and decided to do something about it. So the very next day, I went to a plastic surgeon, saying I wanted to look more handsome. Change my nose and jawline, and also the lips. I want to look more handsome, no matter how much it costs, I said, and the doctor agreed to do it for $35 grand. So I prepared for the surgery, and in a period of 4 months, all my surgeries were complete, and I recovered in 2 months after that. After that, I colored and styled my hair differently. Then I went to the shady part of town where all the illegal stuff goes on to buy myself a new identity. So I spent $5 grand more to buy a new name, new identification, and driver's license. I had already changed my number before anything else, so I was all set to start a new life with a lot of money. So I bought a new apartment and started looking for business ideas because I knew that the money was not going to last long if I just spent it. One day I was just watching the TV and changing channels when I noticed something. There was my picture in one of the news channels under the title Wanted. It was my old face, but it still shocked me for a bit. Then I listened to the news more carefully. This man tricked the concerned husband's wives into giving him a huge sum of money, it said. Oh, so the husbands found out? I thought, because it had already been 6 months and the women had done nothing. So maybe the husbands were the one to file a complaint after finding out. But that was not it. They had even set a reward for the person who was going to give them a proper lead. I was a little concerned, but then I remembered that I looked nothing like the old me anymore, and I changed everything for good. However, I didn't stop keeping up with the news as I wanted to know what and how much they knew about me. And the same day on the news, it came out that they knew about the city I was hiding in. I was scared out of my mind. So I quickly packed up my things and the money and headed out to go somewhere else. I drove for about 2 hours and then got tired, so I stopped at a roadside motel. I took a room there to sleep for the night, but then, suddenly, in the middle of the night, I heard a knock at the door.
Oh no.
I thought it must be some drunk who got confused about the rooms, but they kept on knocking, which was very irritating. So I got up from the bed and walked towards the door to tell them off. But when I opened the door, I got the shock of my life. There were 2 policemen outside the door who quickly arrested me as soon as I opened the door. "What are you doing? I have done nothing," I screamed and struggled, but they just read me my rights and took me to the station. In the station, I saw all the women that I had taken money from with their husbands, and they looked at me strangely as I walked in. I was still insisting that the police must be wrong since I had done nothing. "Cut out the act, boy. We know exactly who you are and what you did," one of the policemen said and took me inside the cell. It was clear to me that they had figured out everything about me, and I kept on wondering how since no one knew about me. I had given the surgeon and the guy who made my new identity enough money to shut their mouth, and I was sure they wouldn't come out and talk, as they would be criminally liable too. Then who was it, I thought, and kept thinking for hours. I didn't have to wait long after that, since the guy who was responsible for my arrest came in to claim the reward money. And I would have never been able to guess who it was. It was the friend I was crashing with at the beginning of everything. He came to me and told me that he did it all for the money. "If you had given me some money before you left, it wouldn't have come to this," he said, and just laughed at my condition. I was so mad that I wanted to punch his face, but I wanted to know how he found out about me, so I asked him. He told me that he had no idea what was going on at first, about why I ran all of a sudden, but then he saw the news and about how I had taken a lot of money. Then he saw that there was a reward to find me. So he checked his phone and looked for an app that we had used in the past to share locations and found out that I hadn't turned off the location sharing setting. And that was how he figured out all the places I had ever been to throughout my run and my exact location. I knew you went to a plastic surgeon to get a new look and a new identity. So I presented it all to the police. And now you are behind bars and I have money, he said, and left with a sass. I felt so bad and foolish for having forgotten about that app completely and about not buying a new phone after changing my number. After that, the police made me return all that was left of the money, and I was sentenced to 4 years in prison. However, I made sure that I kept some money hidden safely for the time I got out of jail. Thanks for watching. Has anyone ever tricked you into giving them money? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget